On today's show, the Cleveland Cavaliers have games against the Brooklyn Nets, Milwaukee Bucks, and Philadelphia 76ers. This week, we bring in the experts to talk about those games on this edition of Locked on Cavs.
You are Locked on Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, Cleveland Magazine, my new Substack, The Inside Shot. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked on Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked on Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure they're subscribed as well. The show is also available on YouTube. If you're watching this video right now, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked on Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show, of course, is sponsored by Robinhood. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. This week, the Cavs have 3 games tonight, which is Monday, if you're listening to this or watching this the day it comes out, Friday and Saturday. They're in Brooklyn Monday, and then at home for a weekend back-to-back against the Milwaukee Bucks Friday and Saturday. Was unable to line up a guest to talk about the Nets. Just scheduling conflicts did not work out. So I will say a couple of words here about Brooklyn. Obviously, they made one of the first trades of the NBA trade season, which has officially started, as most of the league is eligible to be traded as of Sunday, December 15th. A lot of guys' contracts do not allow them to be traded before December 15th, guys that were free agents this past summer. Well, they made a trade. They sent Dennis Schroeder to Golden State, which is the first real big move. I know that the Pacers traded for Thomas Bryant. I don't think that's a big move. I think that this is the first, at least somewhat significant move of the year. And I do think that this is going to have some sort of an effect on the Cavs game against the Nets on Monday night. So think back to the first matchup the Cavs and the Nets had earlier this year. It was the second night of a back-to-back. They played Golden State. They beat Golden State. That was the game they were up by 40 points in the first at halftime, up by 41 points over Golden State at halftime. And they played the Nets on the second night of that back-to-back. And that was a game where the Nets were really able to take the Cavs out of what they wanted to do, right? Like, you think of the Cavs as a team that wants to play faster. They want to be an offensive-oriented team. I know they say they want to be a defensive-oriented team, but they've shown us that offense and pace is something that have been big points of emphasis for them so far this season. And Brooklyn was one of the first teams to really do a great job of forcing the Cavs out of their comfort zone. And a big part of that, I thought, was the play of Dennis Schroeder, where he was picking up, whether he was defending Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell, even Karis LeVert at times, picking up those guys the full 94 feet. And that was something that really, I do think, made a big difference in how the Cavs were able to get into things. The Nets are a team that play at a slow pace under new head coach Jordi Fernandez. I think Jordi is doing a terrific job with that Nets team, and they have been able to slow teams down. And they're 10-15 going into this game, which is a record I think a lot of people did not necessarily expect them to have, myself included. I did not think that they would be this good so far this season. I thought that they'd be a team that just right from the outset would be tanking. Now, they are going to be without some players. As I mentioned, they traded Dennis Schroeder to Golden State. Cam Thomas is dealing with a hamstring injury. He's not going to be playing. Cameron Johnson still is playing. Still a really good player for them. He's somebody that I do think will be traded at some point this season, but he's still on the floor. He's still really the guy to watch out for, I should say, with this Brooklyn Nets team. I think he's their best player. He's the guy that's going to make them tick. The Cavs, if they can stop him, shouldn't really have an issue winning this game. The thing that I'm most fascinated by is, can the Cavs get the Nets to play at their pace? And I do think that being on the second night of a back-to-back in the first matchup that these two teams had was a big deal. But I also thought that Brooklyn got the Cavs to play Brooklyn's style of basketball game. The thing I'm most curious about is, are the Cavs going to be able to get Brooklyn to play Cleveland's style of basketball game. If the Cavs force Brooklyn into that, I don't think they're going to have any issues. If Brooklyn is able to slow this game down, if the pace is going to be something below 100, more so in line with the way that Jordi Fernandez wants his team to play, well, it could be a much more, I don't want to say, it could be a much more dangerous night for the Cavs. Not a game that they necessarily lose, because we have seen them be able to win games that are played at styles that aren't theirs. But I think if the game is played in the style that Cleveland wants it to be played, then they won't have that much of an issue overcoming everything that Brooklyn is able to throw at them. And I will give credit. Like, I think Jordi Fernandez has done a great job with the Nets. I think they're better than anyone, including the people inside that building in Brooklyn, anticipated them being so far this season. But I would also imagine that they're going to fall off here, that the trade of Dennis Schroeder is just the beginning for them, where they won't be a team that's going to be in the play-in race. They're going to be a team that's more so in the race for Cooper Flagg at the top of the draft next summer. So that is something, certainly, that's sort of my little synopsis of the Brooklyn Nets. Again, that game tonight, and then the Cavs have matchups with Milwaukee and Philadelphia later on this week. The Milwaukee game, I think, is a very, very interesting game, one that certainly I have my eye on. So I brought in Tony Cartagena to talk about the Bucks. He is the co-host of Thanalysis, the podcast with Thanalysis Antetokounmpo. Tony actually used to cover the Cavs once upon a time. I worked with him when I was at ESPN Cleveland years and years and years ago. He's a very good friend of mine, somebody I still talk to all the time, despite the fact that now he lives in Wisconsin and I live here in Cleveland covering the Cavs. But he knows what he's talking about. Enjoyed the conversation, really enjoyed getting to catch up with him. And then Kayla Santiago from Locked On Sixers going to join a little bit later. We're going to talk about Philadelphia, everything going on there, Joel Embiid's facial fracture, which is the third of his career, Jared McCain now being on the shelf with a knee injury, and just really whether or not the Sixers are going to overcome or be able to overcome everything that's gone wrong for them so far this year. So we're going to talk to Tony. We're going to talk to Kayla. We're going to learn more about those two teams coming up a little bit later on this week for the Cavs. This is another chance for the Cavs to get rest. Tonight is the second game in an 11-day stretch that started the day after that Miami game, ends on Thursday before they play Milwaukee on Friday. We'll see. I'm very curious to see how the Cavs look at the end of this week. Max Strus not playing tonight. Talked about that on the earlier edition of Locked On Cavs a little bit today. So if you missed what I had to say about Max Strus and that whole situation, go back, listen to today's earlier edition of Locked On Cavs, because I covered it there right in the first segment. I got you caught up, everything that you need to know there. But let's talk to Tony. We're going to do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for just $5 per month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. That's Robinhood.com/gold. ROBINHOOD.com/GOLD. Terms to apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. Today's show is also brought to you by BetterHelp. December is one of the best times of the year. It's the holiday season. It's a time to, especially if you live in Northeast Ohio with what the weather has been, it's a time to, maybe stay inside and keep cozy. Maybe sit by the fireplace or just stay in the warm environment, because it's been a very, very cold winter so far here in Cleveland, and more snow than I remember certainly happening last December too. So some ways to warm up, maybe you want to be under a blanket with some hot chocolate. I love hot chocolate. I think that's a great way to do it. You want to watch a holiday movie, just the best way to spend the month of December are some of those things. But I am here to tell you that therapy is also a great way to bring yourself some comfort that never goes away. Even when the season changes and winter goes away, spring comes, the sun starts coming out more, therapy is not going to go away then. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA, LOCKEDONNBA to get 10% off your first month. Again, visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. And now we bring in a one-time Cleveland Cavaliers beat writer, current co-host of the Thanalysis Podcast with Giannis Antetokounmpo, Tony Cartagena, here to talk Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks vibes are, I think, much better, Tony, than the two times earlier this season when they took on the Cavs. Milwaukee, obviously, in the championship game for the NBA Cup on Tuesday in Vegas. As we record this, we have no idea what's going to happen in that game between them and the OKC Thunder, but they've made it that far. What has changed exactly from the last time the Cavs saw the Bucks in early to mid-November to now?
I think you can pinpoint to them hitting shots as like the easy, let's just look at the stat splits or whatever, and you can be like, all right, they're hitting shots now. But I think it's a lot bigger than that. There's something to be said about locker rooms that just start to gel, locker rooms that just start to mesh. And honestly, I feel like the Bucks just took a little bit of time this year to really get going. Whether it was they didn't have their training camp in Milwaukee, they went on the road, they tried something different, they went out to the West Coast and they tried it that way. And then as the year started, they just really weren't in sync. And it could be a lot of different factors, right? It's first off season with Coach Doc Rivers, his offense being implemented. Giannis, he got off to a typical Giannis start, but as they've gone 12-3 over their last 15 games here, he's really started to shoot a mid-range shot. At the beginning of the season, Brook Lopez, Taurean Prince, and Gary Trent Jr., those last two guys who got brought in as free agents, those two guys kind of just looked lost. And Brook Lopez was shooting, I think at one point, like 20% from three. And he's obviously a much better shooter than that. Taurean Prince has turned things around so much where as last check, and there has been a game since, but he was shooting over 50% from three. I think at 51% was top in the league. So it's one of those things where they started slow. They kind of just got their feet under them. It's really like, it's honestly, I feel as if their first 10 games are more of a ramp up, more of a preseason. Obviously you would like some of those games back and you'd like some of those wins, but the way that they kind of turn things around, it doesn't really surprise me. Giannis is a leader vocally now too. You can see clips of him really speaking to his teammates and making sure everyone is on the same page. And they're an NBA team, right? Like NBA teams, as simple as it is, at the end of the day, basketball happens to be make or misses, right? You have teams like the Washington Wizards, who I think they're, a team that's talented, right? Like they have a lot of individual players, but schematically it might be a hot mess. But in games that they win, they're hitting shots. And sometimes in this league, you just got to hit shots. So when guys like Gary Trent starts to hit shots, it opens up the floor for Giannis. It opens up the floor for Brook Lopez. And now the Bucks have gotten really good contributions from, I mentioned Trent and Taurean Prince. But Bobby Portis has really turned it around. He had a 90% shooting game. He was 9 of 10 on the road in Brooklyn. And then he followed that up in the NBA Cup with, I think, like a 9 of 12, 9 of 11, something like that. So, like, really, honestly, I think it just took them some time to start to gel. There were some lackluster opponents along the way. When they played Orlando in the Cup, they didn't have Wagner, they didn't have Banchero, they didn't have, I think, 2 other guys that were key contributors for them as well. But it's the NBA. You're going to have that from time to time, and the Bucks took advantage. And once this team gets rolling downhill, they're like a snowball, right? They're just going to pick up steam, and get bigger and better.
Right. That's kind of where I wanted to go next, because you mentioned 12-3 in the last 15. It's been the most impressive portion of this season for them, obviously. But it's also come against the stretch of the schedule. I think if you look at their full 82-game schedule, probably one of the easier, if not the easiest, 15-game stretches. And we will, of course, learn more about them on Tuesday when they take on OKC in the Cup final. But how much of this stretch do you think is, okay, the Bucks are actually really good versus, yeah, they've won some games, but they've beat up on some teams that whether they're really good or not are games that they should be winning.
Well, I got to be honest. I think the NBA outside of one team is all pretty much the same. Maybe two teams, right? Like Boston's up here. Like they're very, very talented, and the Bucks went wire to wire with them. And honestly, I think Giannis would say it too, is he took a 3 late in that game. If he makes it, they win that ball game, and he looks like a hero. He took the shot. He missed it. We live to see another day. That team is head and shoulders better than everybody else. But like the gap, especially in the Eastern Conference, I just don't think there's that big of a gap. When you looked at earlier and it was like, oh, no, only the top 3 or 4 teams in the East were above 500. It's just because I think there's a ton of parity. Like some of these teams, especially the younger athletic teams, with a lot of guys that like the casual fan just probably hasn't really heard of before because they played 1 year in college and they're 19 or 20 and crazy athletic. Like those are going to be teams that they start off the year hot and then the NBA hits you and teams start to figure you out and veteran teams get film on you, things like that. But when you look at the Bucks win streak too, they won on the road in Brooklyn. I honestly think Brooklyn's playing really well. They have some firepower there. I think the winning streak started with a huge win at home against Houston where Giannis had a huge block late in the game on Sengun, who's a great player in my opinion. So like, yeah, the names that you see on their calendar, right? They've played the Hornets twice over this stretch. They went 1-1 against them. You see those names, but you also see like some of these teams really aren't as bad as we're like historically used to them being. And at the end of the day, you just have to win ball games. So like winning games, if you beat the bad teams, right? You're just for a locker room like theirs, you're just building the confidence to then go and beat the good teams. And especially for the Bucks, who I think had a little bit of storylines of late in games, who are we going to? We saw in the NBA Cup semifinal against Atlanta, Giannis with a big block, Dame with a big floater to kind of cash that thing in. We saw in the knockout round, Dame hit a step back 3, then went down the lane. It technically wasn't a dunk, but for Dame it was a dunk to close that game out. So I think they're starting to realize like, hey, late in games, we're going to do it on defense. We're going to put the ball in Dame's hands on offense, and they're going to let things happen. So I don't even really look at the calendar as like, oh, we beat bad teams, because there's been such a mix. The best team in the NBA, they went down to the wire with, and I think you could take a lot of positives out of that.
So, and as somebody who has not been super high on the Bucks this year, I do think it is a little unfair to even through this winning streak judge them completely, because Khris Middleton didn't play until recently. And correct me if I'm wrong, I still believe he's on a minutes restriction. I don't believe he's starting games yet. I think they're still trying to sort of ease him back into things.
Yeah, he hasn't started yet.
Right. So what has that been like? What's that process been like for Milwaukee? When do you expect him to sort of get back to maybe not prime Khris Middleton? Because I don't know if in your 30s after surgery on both ankles in one offseason, you're going to be in your prime form a few months after. But when do you expect him to kind of get back up to speed all the way?
April. I say that kind of jokingly.
That's fair. You're right.
No,
but I mean, I get it.
When you see him out there, against Atlanta late in the game, he had 2 free throws, right? And it was just like, all right, 3 weeks ago, it wasn't Khris Middleton getting fouled. And you have all the confidence in the world when Middleton goes up there to take 2 late free throws, right? His chemistry with Giannis, I know Khris Middleton has a contract, but you can't put a price on it. In his first 2 games back, there was just like pick and roll actions where you saw Middleton come here, look up, know where Giannis is going to be, and thread the needle. One was a bounce pass. He had a couple lobs. Like you see where it's going to be. And that's something, it's like you're in Cleveland. They're all football fans there. It is Mahomes and Kelsey. Wow. It's the old Brady and Edelman. You just know where the other person is going to be, and you don't have to think twice. And it's beautiful basketball once they start to let that roll. I think Middleton, from a Bucks fan perspective, I want to see Middleton ramped up to the point where, like in April, he's playing his best basketball. And I think they can do that. They have you great doctors. They're smart. Remember when Kyrie hurt his knee, and then the next year they didn't bring him back till like Christmas Day?
I think it was. It might have been that Christmas Day game against Golden State. Might have been the first game, which you would have been covering the team at the time here. I think that Christmas Day game was right. I mean, I would if I were you. I think the Christmas Day game against Golden State might have been the first one that he played. It may be shortly after that, but you should know better than me.
Something like that, but like in total with the playoffs that year, I think he maybe hit like 50 games.
Right.
And what happened at the end of that season, he was ready and primed to hit a huge shot in Game 7 of the NBA Finals. So like there are so many things where like some of these guys, when you're coming off of injuries, just play it safe. And Middleton's going to be that guy. He's got to get his offense into a better flow. That's going to come with conditioning. That's just pretty simple. Defensively, he's looked really good, but that chemistry with Giannis, like Bucks fans, people who pay attention to this team should be super excited just about, I don't care how old he is. I don't care that, he's had surgeries. When Middleton is healthy and playing well, he's an unbelievable asset for that team.
So every week I ask a specific question. Sometimes it's about the Cavs. Sometimes it's like the same question about whatever team you cover. And this week, Tony, I'm asking because we've got a big enough of a sample size to where not everything's a super small sample size thing anymore. We kind of know who, for the most part, teams are. I think there are still a few questions across the league, but we kind of know who everybody is. So knowing what you know through the first third of the season, because we are at that point somehow, where do you expect the Bucks to finish the regular season in the Eastern Conference? If you had to pick a number 1 through 15, what seed do you think they will be at the end of the regular season?
Off the top of my head, I just go 3. I think Boston finishes 1. Cleveland's going to be a game or 2 behind them. It really just depends on how their head-to-head matchups. And this is granted that everyone's healthy, and let's hope everyone stays healthy on all teams throughout the whole season, obviously. But I just feel like Giannis is not going to let that team be a play-in team. It's just not going to happen. I know early in the season, people are like, oh, the Bucks are playing for the play-in tournament. At the end of the day, he's a top 2, top 3 player in the world, right? I don't think there's any real argument about that anymore. And when you see him go into Giannis mode and play like that, it's just very few people are going to be able to stop that. And then when you have guys around him that are playing well and just hitting shots, they'll make a move at the deadline. They'll get some depth. They'll get some firepower. I'm pretty confident in that. And I don't see this team. The NBA season is long. You're going to have your hiccups. You're going to have your, we played in Detroit on a Monday, then we had to go down to Atlanta on a Tuesday or whatever it is, right? Or we played at home, we had to travel. You're going to have those hiccups. You're going to lose back-to-backs. You're going to lose 3 out of 4. It's the NBA. It's how it works. So it's going to be tough because they're starting to catch a Cleveland, to catch a Boston, but they're going to be right there in the mix. They'll finish 3rd. I'm pretty confident in that at this point.
Well, Tony, thanks so much. You can check out Tony's podcast where he co-hosts with Thanalysis Antetokounmpo, Thanalysis. Sorry,
right,
for some reason I wanted to say analytics. I don't know why. I wanted to say analytics.
You don't even have to edit this out. His name is Thanasis, right? But the podcast is called Thanalysis. So the A is pronounced differently. Thanas and then Thanal. So now, oftentimes, when people see him in person, instead of calling him Thanasis, they'll call him or they'll get caught up on it and not figure out how to say it properly. The podcast is Thanalysis. We're on YouTube. We just interviewed Giannis. It's all over. Go check it out. His name, you want to try it here, Danny? Go ahead.
No, I'm not going to edit this out. I'm going to leave that explanation of you plugging your own stuff in here, and that's going to suffice for me and all of the Locked On Cavs listeners. Tony, thanks so much for doing this, man.
Anytime, man. Thanks for having me.
Today's show also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and with good reason, too, because with FanDuel, right now, new customers can bet $5, and if that first $5 bet wins, you get $150 in bonus bets coming your way. You've got 2 Monday Night Football games tonight. You've got Chicago in Minnesota laying 7 points. I like the Vikings. I mean, Chicago's offense so bad, right? How many yards did they have in the first half last week? Just an abysmal thing watching the Chicago Bears play football. The Vikings -7 have to like that. And then you've got Vegas playing host to the Atlanta Falcons. Don't think either of those 2 teams are very good. Falcons are going to be 5.5 road favorites in that one. So maybe what you do, just maybe, is you like the 2 favorites. Think Minnesota's going to cover. You think Atlanta's going to cover. Maybe check the Vikings -7, the Falcons -5.5, and a parlay. That parlay is going to be at +274. So if you bet $100, you're going to win $274 with FanDuel, or you could place $5. And if that bet wins, you're going to get $150 back in bonus bets. That's just one of the ways FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. So visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started, like I said, with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com today. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And now we head over to Philadelphia, where we are going to talk about one of the most injury-ridden teams in the NBA. The Philadelphia 76ers will be in Cleveland for their second matchup of the year with the Cavaliers on Saturday night. And we bring in Kayla Santiago, who is one of the hosts of Locked On Sixers for us here, the Locked On Podcast Network. Kayla, everything that can go wrong basically has gone wrong so far for Philadelphia, and the latest news is Joel Embiid has a fractured sinus, I believe it has been diagnosed. Jared McCain now needs to have a knee surgery. What else can go wrong? Who is available? What is the Sixers team even going to look like when they get to Cleveland on Saturday night?
Listen, it's like a scary movie that's so bad you don't want to watch again, that you were excited to watch in the beginning of the season. You're like, all right, well, that was not written well. That was not produced well. I never want to see that. That was a waste of my time, because this team, it's just been really crazy. I don't know what's in the air in Philadelphia, but clearly a lot of them are made of glass at this point. So I look at this matchup coming forward, and it is coming off a back-to-back as well for the Philadelphia 76ers. So you already look at it and you say, okay, well, will Paul George play? Because he already said in the beginning of the season he will not play in back-to-back. So they're going to have to choose if he'll play against Charlotte, which I think the better case might be he plays against the Cleveland Cavaliers. As for Joel Embiid, it's two things. He could either be out to 6 weeks and even more due to the diagnosis, and they're going to be able to figure that out this week, or he's going to play with a mask. And we all know he's had 2 oral fractures, now this one being a third. This is a sinus fracture. How Joel looks playing with a mask, he doesn't like it. He throws it off sometimes at the free throw line. We've seen that in previous years. So I don't know if Joel Embiid is going to be back for this game. I think they're going to try to take their time with it. The knee swelling has already been an issue. So, hey, why don't you take your time, figure that out, actually get him healthy? Then you kind of look at it, and somebody that they just got in Pete Nance, who's been playing with the Delaware Bluecoats right now, the brother of Larry Nance Jr., you say, okay, maybe you bring him up. He did have a good game with the Bluecoats last time out, but the depth is just not there for this team right now. It's going to be really tough against the Cavs. I think you sit Paul George maybe for that Hornets game, and then you go on and play him against Cleveland. But the 76ers, I mean, it doesn't look good. Jared McCain was an offensive spark plug. He gave them a lot off the bench. He was struggling a little bit as of late. And then you kind of catch your breath and say, oh, thank goodness, the concussion's okay. And then the next day it comes out he needs knee surgery. So it has been a dumpster fire in Philadelphia, to say the least.
Do you think that all of this is too much to overcome? I mean, every year, and in the Western Conference, the answer to this question is very much the New Orleans Pelicans. But every year, it seems like there's a team in each conference where kind of everything that can go wrong does, and it becomes a season that's just cursed, and you ultimately can't overcome that. Now, Philadelphia still has talent. Tyrese Maxey is one of the best backcourt players in basketball. Paul George, I think, is still a really good basketball player when he's healthy on the floor, when Joel Embiid is healthy. If he does return sooner than later from this latest facial fracture, is one of the best players in basketball. But all of this just adds up. Like, is it getting close to a point? Is it at that point where it just might be, you know what, this isn't our year in Philly?
I had the consensus before the Pacers game that the 76ers could turn it around in the month of December. Then Joel Embiid goes out in that game, and then the Sixers lose horribly to the Pacers 121-107. So now I look at it and I say, without Joel Embiid, this team can just not compete. It doesn't matter if they have Tyrese Maxey. It doesn't matter if they have Paul George, because Joel Embiid is going to be the centerpiece. Now, the only saving grace for this team is that currently the Eastern Conference isn't super competitive when you look at those teams really from like 8 to 6 right now, where the 76ers could squeak in possibly to a play-in game, which they were in a season ago. But at the end of the day, if you're in the play-in spot, you're going to get bumped out of the first round. There's no doubt about it. You want the 76ers to try to avoid the Celtics, the Cavs, the Knicks, even the Bucks, out of all teams in the Eastern Conference. And if you end up in that 8 or 7 spot in terms of play-in, those are the teams you're going to end up facing in the first round. So I don't want to pull the plug on it right now. I think you need to wait until to see what the 76ers do with the sinus fracture. Will Joel Embiid play with the mask? Will he be out for 6 weeks? But it is getting extremely close right now to saying, all right, the Sixers team doesn't have a chance. Rest Joel Embiid, take him out for the rest of the season and see where you go from there. But I think the biggest thing is you just paid Paul George a bunch of money. He comes in here and now he's going to play on a team that's just giving up and not competing. I think without PG, you do that. But the fact that you have Paul George now, I just don't see a realistic possibility that the Philadelphia 76ers can say, all right, well, we just paid Paul George this money. Now we're just going to completely throw in the towel. This season's done and over with. I think they have a slim shot right now to get into that play-in spot. But realistically, I don't think they go any further than that because the squad is just falling apart. And this was the month to dig themselves out of that hole. And now with Jared McCain out, the undated status of Joel Embiid, I just don't see it happening for this team, unfortunately.
All right, Kayla. So we've spent the first 5 minutes of our conversation here talking about all the bad things with the Sixers. What have been the positive things? Because not everything can be bad all the time, but what have been the positive things about this team so far this year in Philly?
Well, Jaron McCain was a super positive piece for this team that turned into negative, right? So he was on that Rookie of the Year campaign. It's been really tough to figure out any positive things with the squad. KJ Martin, though, I think has been a very positive piece. You look at him, you say, okay, he's almost untradeable at this point. And people are going to come at me for saying that, but let me explain here. Because when you give KJ Martin away, you're not going to get somebody like a Jimmy Butler or a super high caliber player. You're going to get a role player like KJ Martin. So why would you give up that piece that has been really fitting in well with this team? He's been able to come in, post good numbers. He's taken advantage of those opportunities and those minutes as well. I really also love the play of Gershon Yabusele. He comes into the games. He's had a very difficult season in the sense of, hey, you're going to go play the 5. You're going to start some games. You're going to back up Andre Drummond. You're going to play the 4 and start with Joel Embiid. So he's kind of been moved around everywhere. And as of late, he hasn't been playing super well, but I think he's something you kind of look at and say, okay, he was a pretty decent pickup for this team. I think the turn, too, that Nick Nurse has realized of starting to play the younger guys and going away from the older guys like a Eric Gordon and go more towards the Ricky Councils, the KJ Martins, the Gershon Yabuselis, that has been a positive mark for this team so far. So I'm excited to see kind of what they do and how they're able to gain more minutes and keep that work up. But overall, that has been the biggest positive point so far. It's very little, but it's still there, people, I promise.
Well, you got to find the positives somewhere. You can't go through the whole season only thinking about the negatives, even if you're a team that was expected to be much better than the Sixers are. So as of we record this Sunday night, I know the Sixers will have games between now and when they face the Cavs in Cleveland on Saturday. They're 7-16, Kayla, as we're talking. They're in 12th place in the East. That's where they'd be if the season ended today. It obviously doesn't, but they're not even in the play-in yet. Where do you, if I give you a crystal ball, where do you see the Sixers finishing in the Eastern Conference when the regular season concludes at the end of April, or the middle of April? Sorry.
Yeah, it's so tough because it's hard to determine anything without the status of Joel Embiid. But then again, when you have Joel Embiid in, these freak injuries start to happen. So it's really tough to tell. I don't know. The basketball gods are not in the favor of the Philadelphia 76ers this season. But I am going to say I do think they get into the play-in spot. I'm going to go that they're going to finish in the 7th seed in the Eastern Conference this year because I just don't think you're in a situation where they're going to give up on Joel Embiid just yet. The knee swelling was there. They decided to try to keep pushing him, try to keep playing him. He wants to play basketball. He's probably going to try to play with a mask or come back after the sinus fracture. So I think if you have him on the floor, even if you are in a deep hole, they're not in a situation to me where they're just going to tank and go down. I think they finish at best the 7th seed this year. And you never know what can happen in the playoffs. I don't think they make it deep into the playoffs, but I do think they are in playing contention.
Well, we'll see how it shakes out. The Sixers in Cleveland, second night of a back-to-back for both teams. They're in Charlotte on Friday. Cavs host the Milwaukee Bucks Friday, as you heard earlier when we talked with Tony on this edition of Locked On Cavs. Kayla, thank you so much. Make sure you check out Kayla, Locked On Sixers, Monday through Friday. Great podcast if you want to learn more about Philadelphia before their matchup in Cleveland on Saturday. Thanks so much again, Kayla.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. Thank you to Tony for joining. Thank you to Kayla for joining. Very excited for those 2 games at the end of this week. Philly is, as we mentioned with Kayla, they are also on the second night of a back-to-back on Saturday, so I don't know what that game is going to look like. But I do think Friday is a really interesting matchup. I think there's a chance that is an emotional letdown game for the Milwaukee Bucks, considering tomorrow night on Tuesday they're playing in the NBA Cup final against Oklahoma City. That's going to be a game that has higher stakes than Friday's game for the Bucks, and that is an opportunity for them to play it. It's going to be a little bit more emotional. It's going to be a bigger deal to them. I think Friday we could maybe see them have a bit of an emotional letdown, but that is important too. And I know that the Cavs are very far ahead of the Bucks in the standings, but they've already won the first 2 games. If they win game number 3, that means they clinch the season series and they would hold any tiebreaker over the Milwaukee Bucks. So that's just one thing to think about as we go here. But like I said, thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen, even if this edition of Locked On Cavs is your second listen today, because the other Locked On Cavs that came out first thing this morning was your first edition. I very much appreciate it. Find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. I will be back tomorrow talking about the Cavs taking on the Brooklyn Nets to start off the week right here on Locked On Cavs.